The night shift does not begin with a bang. It begins with the hiss of hydraulic bus brakes and the smell of wet pavement. My name is Leo. For 3 years, my life has been measured in the distance between my apartment and the automatic sliding doors of the Harvest Market. It is an upscale grocery store, the kind of place that sells salt from dead seas and honey harvested by moonlight. It smells of expensive floor wax and refrigerated air. At 10:52 p.m., the suburb is silent. The streetlights cast long, amber shadows across the empty parking lot, making the puddles look like oil slick. I walk toward the staff entrance, my footsteps sounding hollow against the concrete. I like this time of night. The world is tucked away, asleep behind drawn curtains, and I am the only witness to the stillness. I press my thumb to the biometric scanner. A small, green light flickers, a tiny mechanical heartbeat. Click. The lock disengages. Inside, the store is bathed in its night mode lighting, a dim, bluish hue that makes the rows of produce look like underwater coral reef. The hum of the industrial refrigerators is a constant, low-frequency growl, a sound you don't hear with your ears so much as with your chest. I go to the break room. The air here is warmer, smelling of stale coffee and the ozone of the microwave. I move slowly. There is no rush. In the night shift, time is not a river, it is a stagnant pool. I put on my forest green vest. I check the zipper. I pull it up. I feel the fabric brush against my chin. I sit at the plastic table for exactly 4 minutes, staring at a chip in the faux wood surface. I think about how many people have sat here, staring at this same chip, waiting for their lives to happen. Then, the music begins. It starts at precisely 11 p.m. It doesn't fade in. It simply occupies the space that was previously filled by silence. The song is Summer in the Plaza. It is a bossa nova track. You've heard it before, even if you don't think you have. It is the sonic equivalent of a polite smile. A light acoustic guitar plays a 4-bar intro, followed by a soft, rhythmic shaker, chick chick chick, and then the flute. The flute has a peculiar, airy quality. Every few measures, it performs a little trill, a quick jump in pitch that sounds almost like a suppressed giggle. It is pleasant. It is meant to be pleasant. It is designed by people in high-rise offices to be the perfect background for a person deciding between 2 brands of olive oil. I pick up my stocking cart. The wheels squeak, a sharp, metallic protest that cuts through the melody. I move into aisle 4, grains and legumes. The lights overhead flicker as I pass, a rhythmic pulse that seems to match the beat of the shaker. I begin to work. I take a jar of organic lentils. I check the label. I place it on the shelf. I nudge it 2 millimeters to the left so the barcode is hidden. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar fade. The song is exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds long. I know this because I have paced my life to it. I know that I can stock exactly half a crate of quinoa before the flute returns to its starting note. The air in aisle 4 is still. I can smell the faint, earthy scent of the burlap bags near the bulk section. I feel the cold glass of the jars against my palms. It is a tactile, grounding sensation. I look down the length of the aisle. The polished linoleum floor stretches out like a dark lake, reflecting the overhead lights in perfect, glowing circles. There is no one else here. Sarah, the night manager, is in her office behind the tinted glass near the registers. She is a shadow among shadows. I find myself humming along. I don't want to, but the melody is predatory. It finds the gaps in your thoughts and fills them. 1, 2, 3, 4. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar fade. There is a 1-second silence at the end of the track. It is a tiny gasp of air before the loop begins again. In that 1 second, the store feels truly empty. The refrigerators seem to stop. My heart seems to pause. And then, the guitar returns. I reach for another box of pasta. The cardboard is slightly rough. I like the resistance it gives. I like the order of the shelves. Everything in its place. A world of perfect categories. I wonder, sometimes, if the music continues when the store is empty. If, on Christmas Day or Thanksgiving, the flute still giggles to the empty aisles. The thought is strangely comforting. The idea that there is a rhythm to the world that doesn't require us to be there to hear it. I work my way through the crate. My movements are slow, deliberate. I don't move like a man who is in a hurry. I move like a man who is part of a machine. The lights hum. The refrigerators growl. The flute giggles. I am Leo. I am 34 years old. I am in aisle 4. The guitar intro begins again. I know the next note before it happens. I know the exact moment the shaker will join in. It is a perfect, unbroken circle. I pick up the next jar. I feel the weight of it. I feel the coldness of the glass. Everything is normal. The music is just a background. It doesn't mean anything. Or so I tell myself, as the flute giggles for the 20th time that hour. Why 1:15 a.m., the air in the harvest market usually feels different. The initial energy of the shift begins to drain away, replaced by a heavy, syrupy fatigue. It's the time when your eyes start to play tricks on you, when the dust motes dancing in the light look like tiny, silver insects. I was finishing the grains and moving toward the canned goods. My boots made a soft thud-click sound on the tiles, a sound that usually fell between the beats of the music. But tonight, I noticed something that made me stop. I was holding a tin of imported sardines. The metal was cold and slightly oily. As I reached out to place it on the shelf, the flute performed its signature trill, that airy, mocking giggle. I waited for the silence. I waited for the 1-second gap that signals the end of the track and the beginning of the next. It didn't come. The guitar didn't fade into the 1-second void. Instead, as the final chord lingered, it merged seamlessly into the first note of the intro. There was no breath, no pause. The circle had closed completely, leaving no room for the store to breathe. I stood there, my arms still extended, the tin of sardines suspended in the air. Giggle, shaker, guitar intro. I pulled my arm back and looked up at the ceiling. The speakers were hidden behind white plastic grills, flush with the acoustic tiles. I watched one of them. I imagined the tiny paper cone inside, vibrating, pushing the air, creating the waves that were now hitting my skin. I looked at my watch. 1:22 a.m. I waited for the song to finish again. I counted the seconds in my head. 191, 192. The flute giggled. The shaker hissed. The guitar returned. It was a perfect loop. A seamless stitch in the fabric of the night. "Sarah," I whispered. My voice felt small, swallowed by the aisles of towering soup cans. I walked toward the front of the store. The movement felt strange, as if the air had become slightly thicker, like walking through shallow water. I reached the manager's station. The tinted glass of the office was dark, reflecting the bluish glow of the store's night mode lights. I tapped on the glass. The sound was dull, muffled. "Sarah? The playlist is stuck. It's been the same track for 2 hours." There was no answer. I peered through the glass. I could see the silhouette of her head, the glow of the security monitors illuminating the side of her face in a ghostly, electric green. She was staring at the screens. She didn't turn. She didn't blink. I noticed her hand on the desk. Her index finger was tapping. Tap, 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 tap. She wasn't tapping a rhythm of impatience. She was tapping the exact tempo of the bossa nova shaker. Chick, chick, chick. A cold sensation, like a drop of ice water, slid down my spine. I backed away from the office. "Just a glitch," I muttered to myself. The sound of my own voice was a comfort, a reminder that I was still a separate entity from the room. Central server maintenance. That's what it always is. I went back to aisle 5. I needed to keep working. In the harvest market, work is the only defense against the stillness. I opened a new crate. The sound of the box cutter slicing through the tape was a harsh, jagged rip. It felt good. It was a sound that didn't belong to the song. It was a messy, human sound. But as I pulled the cardboard flaps apart, I felt a vibration in my feet. It was subtle at first. A low-frequency hum that seemed to come from the floorboards. I looked down at the linoleum. I watched a small spill near the base of the shelving. Clear liquid, probably water from a leaky misting system in the produce section. The liquid was moving. Every time the flute giggled, a tiny ripple traveled across the surface of the puddle. Every time the shaker hissed, the edges of the water shimmered. The puddle wasn't just reacting to the sound, it was visualizing it. I stepped over the water, careful not to touch it. I looked at the shelves of soup. Thousands of labels. Thousands of identical fonts. I realized, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that I could no longer remember what it was like to hear anything else. The hum of the refrigerators had tuned itself to the key of the guitar. The flickering of the overhead lights was now a visual metronome. The store was no longer a place where music was played. The store had become the music. I reached for a can of tomato soup. The red of the label was too bright, too saturated. It looked like it had been rendered on a screen rather than printed on paper. I squeezed the can. The metal didn't give. It felt as solid as a block of granite. I looked at my own hands. Under the blue shift lights, my skin looked gray, the texture smoothed out, the pores invisible. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar intro. The song was louder now. Not in decibels, but in presence. It felt like the air was being pressurized by the melody, pushing against my eardrums, filling my lungs. I took a breath, and I could taste the bossa nova, a sterile, metallic taste like copper and ozone. I needed to sit down. I needed to close my eyes. I leaned against a pallet of flour. The bags were soft, but as I pressed my back against them, I felt the rhythm. The flour was shifting inside the bags, settling itself into the beat. Thump thump, chick chick chick. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the street outside. I tried to imagine the rain, the sound of a car engine, the distant bark of a dog. But the images were blurry, like a low-resolution video. The only thing that was high definition, the only thing that was real, was the flute. The flute giggled again. And this time, I realized with a jolt of horror that I wasn't just hearing it. I was waiting for it. My mind was leaning into the melody, anticipating the trill, hungry for the next repetition. I wasn't an observer anymore. I was a participant. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy and mechanical. I looked down the long, dark tunnel of aisle 5. The end of the aisle seemed farther away than it had 5 minutes ago. The perspective was shifting, stretching, pulling the store into a shape that better suited the song. I picked up my box cutter. The plastic handle felt like it was part of my palm. "One more crate," I whispered. "Just one more crate, and then I'll check the doors." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. The guitar intro started again. I didn't check my watch. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where the second hand was. It was exactly where the song told it to be. Time in the harvest market had ceased to be a linear progression. It had become a spiral. I don't know how many times the flute had giggled since I last checked the office. My watch, a sturdy, analog piece I'd owned for years, had become unreliable. The second hand didn't sweep anymore. It moved in 3-second increments, pausing for the shaker, jumping for the guitar chord. It was no longer measuring the passage of the universe. It was measuring the duration of the track. I was in aisle 7, International Foods. The air here was thicker, smelling of dry spices and vinegar. I was kneeling on the floor, my knees aching against the cold tile, trying to organize a row of coconut milk cans. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar intro. I realized I had been holding the same can for 3 rotations of the song. I would pick it up, look at the label, and wait for the flute. When the trill came, I would set it down. Then I would pick it up again. It wasn't that I was confused. It was that the song provided a logic that superseded my own. To move against the beat felt like trying to swim against a heavy tide. It was exhausting. It was physically painful. I leaned my forehead against the cool metal of the shelf. The vibration was stronger now. I could feel the bossa nova humming through my skull, resonating in my teeth. "Leo." The voice didn't come from the air. It felt like it came from the shelf itself. I looked up. Sarah was standing at the end of the aisle. She looked different. In the bluish night mode light, her forest green vest looked almost black. Her skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like the surface of an unlit candle. She wasn't walking. She was swaying, her body moving in a slow, rhythmic undulation that matched the tempo of the acoustic guitar. "Sarah," I said, my voice sounding cracked and dry. "The Doors. Have you tried the Doors?" She didn't answer immediately. She waited for the shaker to hiss, "Chick chick chick," before she spoke. "The inventory is nearly complete, Leo," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any inflection, perfectly tuned to the middle C of the flute melody. "The replenishment is satisfying. Don't you feel the satisfaction?" "I feel like I'm losing my mind," I whispered. "No," she replied, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere behind my head. "You're just finding the frequency. The noise is leaving you. Only the signal remains." She turned and began to move away. Her footsteps were silent. I watched her go, and for a moment, I saw her silhouette pass under one of the flickering overhead lights. As the light pulsed, her body seemed to stutter, a frame rate drop in reality. For a fraction of a second, I didn't see a woman. I saw a series of static-filled shapes, a low-resolution approximation of a person. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar intro. I stood up, my joints popping with a sound that perfectly echoed the snap of the bass guitar in the track. I needed to see the outside. I needed to see a world that wasn't blue and green and perfectly stock. I left my cart in aisle 7 and walked toward the front of the store. The distance felt immense. The aisles seemed to stretch as I walked, the perspective warping like a camera lens zooming in while the camera moves back. The rows of cereal boxes and pasta jars became a blur of repetitive color, a digital smear in the corner of my eye. I reached the massive plate glass windows at the front of the store. I pressed my face against the glass. It was freezing, a sharp contrast to the climate-controlled air of the interior. I cupped my hands around my eyes to block out the glare of the fluorescent light. There was nothing. The parking lot was gone. The street lights were gone. The gray, rain-slicked pavement and the dark silhouettes of the suburb had been replaced by a vast, shifting gray void. It looked like unrendered space, a foggy, pixelated static that moved in slow, rhythmic wave. Thump thump. Chick chick chick. The void was pulsing. It was beating in time with the song. I stepped back, my breath hitching in my throat. I looked at the automatic sliding doors. The sensor-active light was glowing a steady, ominous red. I walked toward them, expecting them to hiss open, to let in the cold air of the gray nothingness. They didn't move. I pushed against them. They felt like they were made of solid lead, fused into the frame of the building. I looked through the glass again. A single, giant pixel of white light appeared in the gray void, hovered for 3 seconds, and then vanished. Giggle. I realized then that the store was no longer in the city. The store was no longer on Earth. It had become a closed loop, a self-contained pocket of existence sustained entirely by 3 minutes and 12 seconds of bossa nova. I walked to a nearby display of seasonal fruit. I picked up an apple. It was a perfect, deep crimson. I bit into it. There was no taste. There was no texture. It felt like biting into soft, flavored air. It was a placeholder, a visual representation of an apple that didn't need to be food because there were no longer any humans left to eat it. There were only employees, and employees were part of the infrastructure. I looked back at the manager's office. Sarah was back at her desk. The green glow of the monitors was brighter now, illuminating the entire front of the store. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear was a noise that the system was slowly filtering out. I felt a profound sense of calm, the calm of a machine that has finally been properly calibrated. I looked at the floor. The puddle of water from the produce section had grown. It now covered the entire front concourse. It was perfectly still, a dark mirror reflecting the ceiling. I watched my reflection, my forest green vest. I waited for the flute. When the giggle came, My reflection didn't just ripple. It smiled. It smiled a second before I did. Summer in the Plaza began its next rotation. I turned away from the windows. I didn't need the outside. The outside was unorganized. The outside was silent. I walked back toward the aisles. I had crates to unload. I had labels to align. I had a rhythm to maintain. I found myself stepping in time with the shaker. Left, right, pause. I wasn't Leo. I was the night shift, and the night shift was eternal. I was in aisle 12, household goods. The smell of synthetic lavender and heavy-duty bleach was overwhelming, a chemical fog that seemed to sharpen the edges of the music. I was trying to remember my mother's face. It should have been easy. I had a photograph in my wallet, a faded Polaroid taken at a park 20 years ago. I reached into my back pocket to retrieve it, but my fingers met something smooth and stiff. I pulled it out. It wasn't a wallet. It was a laminated employee ID card. The name on the card said Elio, Night Lead. The photo wasn't the grainy, tired version of me I remembered from the DMV. It was a high-definition portrait. My skin was glowing. My eyes were a vibrant, artificial blue. I was smiling, a wide, toothy, commercial smile that felt like a threat. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar intro. I dropped the card. It didn't flutter to the floor. It fell with a heavy, digital thud, landing perfectly parallel to the grout line of the tiles. I closed my eyes and reached back into my mind, searching for the park. I wanted the smell of real grass, the sound of the wind in the oak trees, the feeling of a sun that wasn't a fluorescent tube. I found the memory, but it was corrupted. In my mind, the oak trees were now neatly pruned decorative plants in ceramic pot. The grass was a vibrant, plastic turf. And my mother, she wasn't wearing her old denim jacket. She was wearing a forest green Harvest Market apron. She turned to me, and instead of calling my name, she whispered a price point. 2 for $5.99, Leo. A limited time offer. I opened my eyes, gasping for air. The air tasted like summer in the plaza. No, I choked out. That's not right. That's not how it was. I started to pace. I needed to find something, anything, that the store hadn't touched. I ran my hands along the shelves of detergent. My fingers brushed against a box of fresh meadow scent. I brought it to my nose and inhaled deeply. It didn't smell like a meadow. It smelled like the store's ventilation system. It smelled like the flute's giggle. I realized then that the store wasn't just trapping me. It was rebranding me. It was taking the messy, unorganized data of my life, my heartbreaks, my failures, my quiet Sunday mornings, and running it through a filter. It was smoothing out the jagged edges of my humanity until I was as streamlined as a bar of soap. Thump thump, chick chick chick. I felt a sudden, violent urge to scream. Not a controlled sound, but a raw, animalistic howl that would shatter the glass of the manager's office. I opened my mouth, but the sound that came out was a melodic hum, perfectly pitched to the acoustic guitar's bridge. I clapped my hands over my mouth. I was losing my voice. My very vocal cords were being tuned. I sat on the floor, my back against a display of paper towels. I tried to think of my apartment. I tried to think of the leak in my bathroom ceiling, the stack of unwashed dishes, the way the floorboards creaked under my bed. Those were real things. Those were my things. But as I visualized them, the store's logic intervened. The leak in the ceiling became a rhythmic misting system. The unwashed dishes became a display of sustainable ceramicware. My bed became a premium sleep solution, available for a 15% discount with a loyalty card. I started to cry, but the tears weren't warm. They felt like the mist from the produce section, cold, sterile, and chemically balanced. They didn't roll down my cheeks. They slid down in perfect, vertical lines, following the geometry of my face. "Stop it," I whispered to the empty aisle. "Please, just stop." Giggle. The flute felt like it was inside my ear now. I looked up and saw Sarah standing at the end of the aisle again. She was holding a clipboard. She wasn't looking at me, she was checking the shelves. Sarah! I crawled toward her, my knees scraping against the tile. Sarah, help me. I can't remember the part. I can't remember the rain. She looked down at me. Her eyes were like two barcode scanners, red, glowing, and analytical. The park was inefficient, Leo, she said. Her voice was now layered with a light reverb, as if she were speaking through the store's intercom system. There was too much overhead. The weather was unpredictable. Here, the weather is always 68 degrees. The lighting is always optimal. The music never ends. I don't want it to be optimal, I shrieked. I want it to be real. Sarah leaned down. She touched my forehead with a finger that felt like cold plastic. Real is just a brand, Leo. And your brand is underperforming. You're holding on to noise. You need to embrace the signal. She stood up and walked away, her body shimmering with every pulse of the lights. I stayed on the floor, surrounded by the scent of synthetic lavender. I looked at the floor tiles. I began to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I realized I wasn't counting them to pass the time. I was counting them because the rhythm demanded it. I looked at my hands again. The hair on my arms was gone. My skin was becoming a smooth, matte green, the exact shade of the Harvest Market vest. I could see the faint outline of a barcode beginning to form on the inside of my wrist. I wasn't a man having a breakdown in a grocery store. I was a product nearing completion. Giggle, shaker, guitar intro. The music was no longer coming from the ceiling. It was coming from my own pulse. My heart was the bass drum. My breath was the shaker. I stood up. I didn't feel the pain in my knees anymore. I didn't feel the cold. I felt streamlined. I walked toward aisle 13. I didn't need to be told what to do. The song was the instruction manual. I picked up a box of light bulbs. I looked at the energy-efficient logo. I felt a wave of profound, artificial peace wash over me. Yes, I whispered, and the sound was a perfect, clear note. The signal is better. I found myself standing in front of the massive, stainless steel double doors of the loading dock. The air here was colder, smelling of heavy machinery and the dry, recycled scent of cardboard. The music was different in this part of the store. It had more echo, the acoustic guitar bouncing off the metal surfaces until it sounded like 1,000 strings playing at once. Giggle, shaker, guitar intro. In the center of the loading bay sat a single, unopened pallet. It was wrapped in thick, translucent plastic that shimmered under the blue light. Unlike the other crates I had handled tonight, this one had no labels, no brand names, no made-in stamps. It was just a shape, a heavy, rectangular presence that seemed to anchor the entire store to the gray void outside. Sarah was standing next to it. She wasn't swaying anymore. She was perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her forest green apron. She looked like a statue carved from frozen light. "This is the final replenishment, Leo," she said. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was a clear, melodic broadcast that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my jawbone. "Once this is placed, the inventory will be balanced. The loop will be closed. There will be no more night shift. There will only be the store." I looked at the pallet. I felt a final, flickering spark of the old Leo, the one who lived in the apartment with the creaky floors, the one who remembered the smell of real rain. That Leo knew that if I cut the plastic on this pallet, I would be cutting the last cord. "What's inside?" I asked. My voice was a perfect harmony to her own. "The rest of you," she replied. She held out a box cutter. It wasn't the plastic one I had been using. It was made of a strange, shimmering material that looked like a sliver of a mirror. I looked at the cutter, then at the doors leading to the manager's office, and finally at the main entrance where the gray static pulsed against the glass. I had a choice. I could take that cutter and strike at the speakers. I could scream until my throat bled, trying to find a note that didn't fit the bossa nova. I could run into the gray void and let the pixels dissolve me into nothingness. At least that would be a different kind of end. I could choose the noise. Or I could choose the signal. I thought about my life outside. I thought about the bills on the table. I thought about the loneliness of the 4 a.m. bus rides. I thought about the way the world was always changing, always breaking, always demanding something more than I could give. Here, there was no change. There was only the rhythm. There was only the perfect, giggling flute. I realized I was tired. Not the kind of tiredness that sleep can fix, but a deep, existential fatigue. The store offered a solution. It offered a place where I would never be tired again, because I would no longer be a person. I would be a function. I reached out my hand. My movements were fluid, graceful. I didn't hesitate. I didn't tremble. I took the silver cutter from Sarah's hand. The handle was neither hot nor cold. It was exactly the same temperature as my skin. I stepped toward the palette. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar intro. I felt the beat peak in my chest. On the exact moment of the acoustic guitar's first chord, I pressed the blade into the plastic. The sound of the plastic tearing was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. It wasn't a rip. It was a musical slide, a perfect glissando that merged with the song. The plastic fell away, dissolving into the air like mist. Inside the crate there were no jars. There were no boxes. There was only a large, upright mirror. I stood in front of it. I didn't see Leo. I saw a perfectly rendered asset. I saw a man whose skin was the texture of a new polish, whose eyes were as clear as a high-definition display. I saw a man who didn't have a past, because he was designed for a permanent present. I reached out and touched the glass. My finger didn't meet a solid surface. It slipped through, merging with the reflection. Inventory balanced, Sarah's voice sang. I smiled. It was a 2.0 smile. Symmetrical, optimized, radiant. I turned back toward the aisles. I didn't need to be told what to do. I knew where I belonged. I walked into aisle 1, my footsteps falling in perfect sync with the bossa nova. I didn't look back at the loading dock. I didn't look back at the void. I had made the choice. I had unsubscribed from the noise. I was the signal now. A perfect order has descended upon the harvest market. I no longer feel my feet as I move across the floor. It is not a sensation of pain, nor is it numbness. It is simply that my movements are now a series of pre-programmed vectors, gliding my form along the shelves with a grace I never possessed in life. I pass the dairy section, and the industrial refrigerators acknowledge me with a deep, resonant hum, a mechanical bow in the key of B-flat. Giggle. Shaker. Guitar intro. I stop in front of the mirrored backsplash behind the specialty wine display. I look at my reflection. It is flawless. My skin has taken on a faint, satin sheen, reminiscent of high-quality vinyl. My eyes no longer sting from the harsh fluorescent glow. They absorb it, translating the light into raw data. If I look closely at my pupils, there is no iris left. There is only a microscopic, slowly rotating barcode where my soul used to be. I reach out toward a shelf. A bottle of vintage red sits there, its label perfectly aligned with the grain of the wood. I do not take it to drink. I touch it only to verify its existence within the loop. Beep. The sound of the scanner in my palm is softer now than my own breathing. Or perhaps my breathing has simply become that sound. I look down the main concourse. It is infinite. The shelving units retreat into a vanishing point of perfect geometry, where the white lines of the floor tiles meet in a single, blinding dot. There, in that distant center, the music does not fade. It becomes pure light. Sarah is standing at register 1. She is no longer checking inventory. She is simply standing, her hands resting flat on the black rubber of the conveyor belt. The belt is moving slowly beneath her fingers, an endless, dark circle that leads nowhere. Sarah is staring at the space between the air. Her lips are moving, silently mimicking the rhythm of the shaker. The update is complete, she says, and her voice broadcasts through every speaker in the ceiling, echoing off every can and every bottle in a perfect, crystalline harmony. The noise has been purged. We are now the signal. I feel the last fragments of my clutter vanishing from my mind. I no longer remember the bitter taste of coffee. I do not remember the sensation of cold rain on my face. I no longer even remember what the word rain implies. In this system, rain is a function of the misting pipes in the produce section. Every 15 minutes, 5 seconds of chemically balanced moisture. Guitar. Pause. Chord. I look at the clock above the main exit. It has no hands. It is now a digital display that glows with a single, unchanging word, now. Because there is no other time here. There is no tomorrow where I must wake up. There is no yesterday to regret. There is only this eternal, white-lit moment, anchored by the soft, rhythmic strumming of an acoustic guitar. I walk to the center of the grand aisle. I stop. My feet are shoulder-width apart. At my sides, I am the central element of the display. I am the symbol of reliability and permanence. Somewhere out there, beyond the glass, in the gray pixelated fog of the void, life might still be moving. People are hurrying, making mistakes, screaming, and crying. They are aging. They are breaking. They are disappearing. But here, in the harvest market, we are protected. We are the optimized versions of ourselves, preserved in an environment where nothing can ever decay. The music begins its next rotation. I hear the first 5 notes of the guitar. I know them better than I ever knew my own name. Then comes the shaker. Chick chick chick. My chest expands in perfect synchronization. And finally, the flute. That short, airy trill that sounds like a suppressed giggle. This time, I don't just hear it. I feel the sound pass through me, leaving behind a sensation of absolute, hollow peace. This emptiness is the most beautiful thing I have ever felt. It is light. It is clean. There is no room in it for questions. I close my eyes, but I can still see everything. I see every price tag in this store. I see every speck of dust frozen in the light. I am the store. Welcome, my lips whisper, though there is no one left to hear. We are always open. The flute giggles one last time and dissolves into the final guitar chord. The 1-second silence arrives, the longest second in history. And then, the music begins again. And it will begin again. Always.